She scrounged for materials, desiccated moss growing in the stone crevices, several pieces of petrified wood from an ancient fossilized tree, and a handful of emergency fuel tablets from her survival kit. The shelter's walls provided some protection from the wind, and she found a spot where the rock had formed a natural chimney, allowing smoke to vent while containing the heat. Elsa arranged the kindling with careful precision, building a small teepee structure just as her grandmother had taught her. She struck one of the fuel tablets against the stone, and it flared to life with a bright chemical burn. The moss caught quickly, its dried fibers eager for combustion. Within minutes, she coaxed a small fire to life, its orange luminescence driving back the encroaching darkness. The cub's eyes grew wide as they beheld the dancing flames. They had never witnessed fire before. Vrakan civilization had never discovered its secrets. Their planet lacked the right combination of atmospheric oxygen and combustible materials to make natural wildfires common. Yet some instinct older and deeper than fear drew them inexorably toward the warmth. Elsa positioned them at the optimal distance, close enough to absorb the heat, but far enough to avoid harm. She watched as their shivers gradually subsided, as color returned to their bluish tongues, as life reasserted itself in their small bodies. Then she lowered herself to the ground, spine pressed against the frigid stone, plasma rifle resting across her thighs, and prepared herself for the long vigil ahead. The hours dragged past like wounded things. Elsa battled against the creeping weight of exhaustion, knowing that if she surrendered to sleep, her charges might not survive until dawn. The fire demanded constant attention, feeding it, adjusting the wood, ensuring the flames remained steady but not too large in the confined space. The cubs, gradually thawing, began to relax their vigilance. The smallest, a male with comically oversized paws that suggested he'd grow into a massive adult, crawled into her lap and coiled himself into a tight ball. His racing heartbeat slowly steadied to a healthier cadence, and after a while, he began to purr. The sound was deeper than a cat's purr, more like a diesel engine idling, and it vibrated through Elsa's entire body. The white-blazed female observed Elsa with shrewd, calculating eyes, as though attempting to decipher the nature of this peculiar, furless creature who had chosen to save them. Occasionally, the cub would reach out with one small paw, tentatively touching Elsa's hand, testing the texture of her skin, learning this new being through careful exploration. The third cub, another male with distinctive tufted ears, remained more wary. He stayed close to his siblings but watched Elsa with guarded suspicion, ready to bolt at the slightest provocation. She didn't take it personally. Trust had to be earned, especially from a creature whose survival depended on correctly identifying threats. As Elsa fed another piece of wood into the fire, she found herself talking to them softly, maintaining a steady stream of gentle conversation. It didn't matter that they couldn't understand her words. Her grandmother had always said that frightened animals responded to tone more than content, and these cubs were no exception. They seemed to relax further with each passing hour, their initial terror gradually giving way to cautious curiosity. "You know what the funny thing is?" Elsa murmured, stroking the purring cub in her lap. "The council thinks your kind are just animals. Dangerous, yes, but not truly sentient. I've been arguing with them for months, trying to show them the evidence. The tool use I've documented. The complex social structures. The way your packs hold what can only be described as strategic discussions before major hunts." The white-blazed female tilted her head, as if actually listening. "They don't want to hear it," Elsa continued. "Because if they admit you're sentient, they'd have to stop the colonial expansion into your territory. They'd have to negotiate instead of simply containing you in preserves. There's too much money at stake. Arcturus 7 has rich mineral deposits, and your hunting grounds sit right on top of the most valuable veins." She'd spent years studying xenobiology across dozens of worlds, and she'd seen this pattern repeat itself with tragic regularity. Humans weren't the villains in every story. The galaxy was full of species capable of greed and exploitation. But humanity's rapid expansion following their discovery of faster-than-light travel had brought them into conflict with countless indigenous populations. Some conflicts ended in negotiation. Others ended in tragedy. Around the fourth hour of her watch, Elsa detected movement beyond the shelter's entrance. Her thermal scanner registered a massive heat signature, an adult Vraken, likely attracted by either the cub's scent or the unprecedented sight of open flame. Her finger shifted to her rifle's trigger mechanism, though she didn't yet raise the weapon. Not immediately. Her heart hammered in her chest as she ran through her options. The plasma rifle could drop an adult Vraken with a well-placed shot, but only if she had time to aim and fire before it closed the distance. In these confined quarters, she'd get one chance. Missed, or if the shot only wounded it, a towering silhouette materialized at the threshold. The three cubs instantly erupted in a chorus of plaintive mews, their little voices filled with relief and joy. The adult Vraken, a male, judging by his immense size, stepped into the firelight's reach. He was colossal, easily 3 meters from nose to tail, his dark fur crossed with the pale lines of countless scars. Each scar told a story of survival, territorial disputes, hunts gone wrong, challenges to dominance. This was a warrior who had fought his way to the top of the Vraken hierarchy and maintained his position through strength and cunning. His amber eyes found Elsa's, and for an endless moment, neither creature moved. She could see his nostrils flaring as he analyzed the scene before him. The strange fire, the foreign creature, his cubs nestled safely in her lap. His lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth designed to tear through flesh and crush bone. Understanding dawned on Elsa then. This was the cub's father, separated from his offspring when the storm struck. He possessed the capability to end her life in seconds, to shred her protective suit with those curved talons and reclaim his young. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to raise her weapon, to defend herself before it was too late. But she made no such move. Instead, she slowly, carefully, lifted the cub from her lap and set him down gently. Then she raised both hands, palms outward, in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I'm not a threat," she said softly. "I'm trying to help them. They were freezing. I gave them warmth." The male Vraken's gaze shifted from Elsa to the fire, then to his cubs, dry, warm, safe, and very much alive. His ears, which had been pinned back against his skull, gradually swiveled forward. The tension in his massive shoulders eased by a fraction. He regarded the fire with something approaching wonder. In all his years, across all his hunts and battles, he had never encountered anything like this. The dancing flames, the heat that radiated without a living body to produce it, the light that pushed back the darkness. It was alien, perhaps even magical from his perspective. Then something remarkable happened. The male Vraken settled his bulk at the shelter's entrance, positioning himself as both windbreak and secondary guardian. He folded his legs beneath him and wrapped his impressive tail around his body, his posture protective but not aggressive. His intent was unmistakable. They would both stand watch over the cubs through the remaining darkness. The cubs, recognizing their father, tumbled over each other in their eagerness to reach him. He lowered his massive head and nuzzled each one carefully, checking them for injuries with gentle sniffs and soft whuffs. The white-blazed female, caught between her father and the human who had saved her, seemed momentarily torn. Then she did something that made Elsa's breath catch in her throat. She walked to Elsa first, butting her small head against the human's leg in what could only be interpreted as gratitude, before joining her siblings at their father's side. Elsa felt tears prick her eyes. This moment of connection across species was exactly why she'd dedicated her life to xenobiology. Not for the council reports or the academic papers, but for these transcendent instances when consciousness recognized consciousness, when two intelligent beings from different worlds found common ground. "Thank you," she whispered, though whether she was thanking the Vraken for not killing her or thanking the universe for allowing her to witness this moment, she couldn't quite say. The male Vraken's amber eyes found hers again, and she saw intelligence there that the council refused to acknowledge. He understood. Perhaps not in the way a human would understand with language and abstract reasoning, but in the deeper way that all parents understood those who protected their children. A debt had been created, an alliance forged in the crucible of the storm. The hours that followed passed with surreal tranquility. Elsa maintained the fire, while the male Vraken kept watch at the entrance, his keen senses alert for any additional threats. The cubs, exhausted by their ordeal, eventually curled up in a pile and fell into deep sleep, their small bodies rising and falling in peaceful rhythm. At one point, Elsa dozed off despite her best efforts, exhaustion finally claiming her. She woke with a start perhaps 20 minutes later to find the male Vraken watching her with those penetrating amber eyes. He could have killed her while she slept, could have taken his cubs and disappeared into the thinning storm. Instead, he'd maintained his position, standing guard over the entire makeshift family, human and Vraken alike. When dawn finally fractured the horizon and the storm's fury spent itself, the transformation of the landscape was startling. The wind had carved the ice into fantastic shapes, creating sculptures that gleamed in the pale light of Arcturus VII's distant star. The sky shifted from black to deep purple to a pale, crystalline blue. Elsa's communicator, silent throughout the night due to interference from the storm, suddenly erupted with frantic transmissions. Leon's voice, tight with worry. Director Kamal demanding status updates. The automated systems of the research station confirming that rescue craft were en route. She stood stiffly, her body protesting after a night of cold and sleeplessness, and watched as the male Vraken gently retrieved his cubs one by one. He carried them with infinite care, his powerful jaws that could crush bone handling their fragile bodies with remarkable delicacy. The white-blazed female looked back at Elsa as her father lifted her, and their eyes met one final time. Before departing, the male turned back to regard her. In those amber depths, she recognized an expression she had witnessed before in the eyes of Earth's wolves: acknowledgement, respect, and perhaps even something approaching gratitude. Then he made a sound, a low rumbling vocalization that started deep in his chest and built into something complex and layered. Elsa's translation software struggled with it, finally producing debt, obligation, thank, pack, human. It wasn't quite right. The software couldn't capture the emotional nuances, but the meaning was clear enough. "You're welcome," she replied, knowing he wouldn't understand the words but hoping he'd understand the sentiment. "Keep them safe." The Vraken family vanished into the snow-covered landscape just as the first rescue shuttle crested the horizon, its engine screaming across the ice as it vectored toward her beacon. Leon's voice erupted from her communicator in a burst of static. "Elsa, thank God you're alive. We've been attempting to reach you all night. Did you manage to find shelter?" Elsa smiled, still watching the spot where the Vraken had disappeared. "Yes, Leon. I found shelter. And I wasn't alone. The extraction was efficient, the team professional. They checked her for hypothermia and frostbite, administered warming fluids, and wrapped her in thermal blankets. During the flight back to the research station, Elsa sat in silence, processing everything that had happened. The medical officer kept asking if she was in shock, if she needed psychological evaluation. She assured him she was fine. But she wasn't fine. She was changed. Later, when she submitted her official report, the response was predictably mixed. The xenobiologists received it with astonishment bordering on disbelief. Dr. Yoshi Tanaka, one of her colleagues, immediately began planning follow-up studies. Dr. Helena Vasquez wanted to present the findings at the next Galactic Council Symposium. But Director Kamal's reaction was less enthusiastic. "This complicates things, Dr. Nordstrom," he said during their private meeting, his three-fingered hands steepled beneath his chin. Kamal was Zenthari, his crystalline skin refracting the office lights into prismatic patterns. "The mining consortium has already filed their exploitation claims. If your report suggests the Vraken possess sufficient sentience to qualify for protected status." "They do," Elsa interrupted firmly. "Director, I've been documenting their behavior for 6 months. The fire incident was just the final proof. They understand reciprocity. They recognize kindness and respond to it. They form complex social bonds and demonstrate tactical planning. By every metric we use to evaluate sentience, they qualify." Kamal sighed, a sound like wind through crystal chimes. I don't doubt your findings, Doctor. But the political implications are significant. The consortium employs over 50,000 beings across a dozen species. Those mining operations fund a substantial portion of this sector's economy. Then they'll have to mine somewhere else, Elsa said, her voice hard. We don't get to commit genocide just because it's economically convenient. The word genocide hung in the air between them. It was the right word, and they both knew it. If the expansion proceeded without recognizing Vrakan sentience, the species would be displaced, contained, eventually reduced to remnant populations clinging to survival in inadequate preserves. It had happened before on other worlds. It would happen again unless someone drew a line. I'm forwarding your report to the Council's Ethics Committee, Kamal finally said, along with my recommendation that Arcturus 7 be granted provisional protected status, pending further investigation. The consortium won't like it. You should prepare for pushback. Elsa nodded. She'd expected as much. Thank you, Director. Over the following weeks, the story of that night in the storm spread throughout the research station and beyond. A human had employed primitive combustion technology to preserve the offspring of one of the galaxy's most formidable predators, earning the trust of a fully grown male in the process. The incident became another entry in the expanding mythology of humanity, the species that refused to permit suffering, even among potential adversaries. But for Elsa, it was never about building mythology. It was about doing what was right in the moment when it mattered most. 3 months later, she was back in the field, observing the same Vrakan pack from her mobile blind. And there, among the hunters coordinating their movements across the ice, she spotted them. 3 adolescent Vrakan, nearly adult-sized now, learning the skills they'd need to survive in this harsh world. The white-blazed female, larger and more confident, paused during the hunt and looked directly at Elsa's blind. The young Vrakan couldn't possibly see through the camouflage or detect her scent over the downwind approach, yet somehow she knew. She made that same complex vocalization her father had used, the one the translation software couldn't quite capture. Elsa smiled and whispered into the recording equipment. You remember. You actually remember. The Galactic Council's Ethics Committee was still deliberating on Arcturus 7 status, the bureaucratic process moving with frustrating slowness. But Elsa had faith that truth would eventually prevail. It had to, because if humanity's expansion across the stars meant abandoning their fundamental values, then they had no business being out here at all. The species that kindled fires against the darkness and remained vigilant to protect those who could not protect themselves. The species that carried stubbornness and compassion in equal measure across the stars, never forgetting the lessons learned in Earth's ancient cold, where the first fires had been lit and the first alliances forged between human and beast. As night fell over Arcturus 7 and the temperature plummeted once again, Elsa sat in her climate-controlled observation post, watching the Vrakan pack settle down for the evening. They formed a protective circle, the adults on the outside, the young in the center, just as humans had done in their own ancient past. 2 species, separated by evolution and light years, united by the fundamental truth that had guided both across millennia. Family was worth protecting. Life was worth preserving. And in the darkest, coldest nights, whether of ice or of the soul, one needed only a spark of compassion to kindle hope. Elsa activated her recording equipment and began her nightly report, her words carrying across the void to those who would listen, to those who would care. Because stories mattered. Truth mattered. And somewhere in the council chambers, in the corporate boardrooms, in the hearts of those who made decisions affecting countless lives, her words might make a difference. The fire she lit that night in the storm had not gone out. It had only grown, spreading from one small shelter on a frozen moon to councils and committees across the galaxy. And it would continue to burn. 6 months after the storm, the Galactic Council convened a special session to address the Arcturus 7 situation. Elsa received the summons while she was in the middle of tracking a Vrakan hunting party across the northern ice fields. The message was terse and official, signed by Council Representative Thrix himself, a Delvarian whose species prided themselves on bureaucratic precision and emotional detachment. Your presence is required, the message read. Testimony regarding case file ATX 7-0042, sentience determination and resource allocation conflict. Leon helped her prepare for the journey to the Council's orbital station. They're going to tear your report apart, he warned, reviewing her data files one final time. The consortium has hired the best xenopsychologists money can buy. They'll argue that what you interpreted as gratitude was just instinctual protective behavior. That the Vraken's response to fire was simple stimulus response, not genuine wonder. Elsa had expected this. Then we show them everything. Not just that one night, but 6 months of behavioral data. The tool use. The tactical coordination. The complex vocalizations that demonstrate intentional communication. It might not be enough, Leon said quietly. His dark eyes were troubled behind his glasses. The Council has approved dozens of exploitation claims in the past decade. They're not going to reverse course easily, especially not when it means disrupting a multi-billion credit operation. Then we make them understand what's at stake, Elsa replied, her jaw set with determination. We make them see what I saw in that shelter. The Council station was a marvel of engineering, a massive orbital construct that housed representatives from over 300 species. Elsa had been here once before, years ago, for her doctoral defense. Then, she'd been nervous but excited. Now, she felt the weight of an entire species' future resting on her shoulders. The hearing chamber was circular, with tiered seating that rose toward a domed ceiling displaying a real-time view of the stars beyond. Representatives from various species occupied their designated sections, their forms ranging from the vaguely humanoid to the utterly alien. The air smelled of a dozen different atmospheric preferences, filtered and balanced by sophisticated environmental controls. At the center of it all stood the testimony platform, a circular stage where Elsa would make her case. The consortium's legal team occupied a prominent position in the gallery. Elsa recognized their lead advocate, a human named Marcus Chen, who had made a fortune defending corporate interests in exploitation disputes. He was reviewing a data tablet, his expression confident and relaxed. Next to him sat Dr. Voriankes, a Zenthari xenopsychologist whose publications had argued for narrow definitions of sentience that conveniently excluded most species in the path of development. Council Representative Thrix called the session to order with a sharp rap of his crystalline gavel. This council convenes to hear testimony regarding Arcturus 7 and the indigenous Vraken population. Dr. Elsa Nordstrom, you have submitted a report claiming that the Vraken demonstrate sufficient sentience to qualify for protected status under the Galactic Accords. Please present your findings. Elsa stepped onto the platform, and immediately a holographic display activated around her, ready to show whatever evidence she chose to present. She took a deep breath, thinking of 3 small cubs huddled in the freezing dark, and began. Honored representatives, for the past 18 months, I have lived on Arcturus 7, studying the Vraken in their natural habitat. What I've discovered challenges our preconceptions about intelligence and sentience. She activated the first hologram, showing Vraken using modified stones to crack open the ice and access aquatic prey beneath. Tool use. Not instinctual, but learned and taught from generation to generation. The blizzard struck without warning, transforming the frozen moon of Arcturus 7 into a shrieking, white hellscape. Dr. Elsa Nordstrom cinched her thermal coat tighter around her frame as her breath crystallized into delicate ice particles that hung suspended in the lethal cold. The research station lay 3 kilometers distant, but the tempest had driven her to take refuge within a jagged rock formation that thrust upward through the ice like the fangs of some ancient beast. For 6 months, she had devoted herself to studying the native Vraken, enormous wolf-like hunters possessing scythe-like claws and a level of intelligence that seemed to brush against the threshold of consciousness. Official Galactic Council documentation labeled them as hazardous wildlife, nothing more. Yet when Elsa gazed into those molten amber eyes, she perceived something deeper, something that echoed the spirit of Earth's wolves before humanity had pushed them to the brink of annihilation. The day had begun ordinarily enough. Elsa had been conducting behavioral observations from her mobile blind, documenting the hunting patterns of a pack that controlled the Northern Territory. She'd watched them coordinate their movements with tactical precision, using complex vocalizations and body language that suggested far more cognitive sophistication than the Council's reports indicated. The pack's alpha female, a magnificent specimen with battle-scarred flanks, had even seemed aware of Elsa's presence, occasionally glancing in her direction with what could only be described as curious tolerance. It was that same alpha female Elsa had been tracking when the atmospheric sensors on her wrist display began screaming warnings. Pressure drop. Temperature plummet. Wind velocities spiking to catastrophic levels. She'd had perhaps 10 minutes to seek shelter before the storm wall hit, like a physical force. The research station was too far. The mobile blind offered no protection against winds that could strip flesh from bone. So she'd run, her boots pounding against the permafrost, until she'd spotted the rock formation and dove into its meager sanctuary just as the world turned white. Then she heard it, a sound that pierced through the storm's rage like a blade. A high, keening cry of distress, raw with terror and desperation. Every instinct honed by years of survival training demanded she remain sheltered, that she wait for the storm to exhaust itself. But her humanity, that stubborn, irrational core that had propelled her species across 1,000 alien worlds, refused to allow her to ignore a suffering creature. She activated her helmet's thermal imaging system and plunged back into the teeth of the blizzard. The wind struck her like a battering ram, nearly knocking her off her feet. Ice crystals scoured her visor, reducing visibility to mere meters. The temperature readout on her HUD showed -73 degrees Celsius and dropping. Her suit's heating elements struggled against the cold, draining power at an alarming rate. 20 meters from her sanctuary, she discovered them. 3 Vraken cubs, each no larger than a German shepherd, pressed together in a shallow depression carved into the ice. Their silver-blue pelts were already encrusted with frost, and their small frames shook with violent tremors. Elsa's medical scanner confirmed what her eyes had already registered. Their core temperatures were plummeting with terrifying speed. Within the hour, perhaps sooner, hypothermia would claim them. She dropped to her knees beside them. The cubs jerked backward, exposing needle-sharp milk teeth as they hissed their defiance. Their fear radiated outward in waves, primal and absolute. These weren't the apex predators they would one day become. Right now, they were simply terrified children, lost and freezing in a world that had turned hostile. Moving with deliberate slowness, Elsa peeled off one glove and extended her bare hand toward them, allowing the wind to carry her scent forward. The cold bit into her exposed skin immediately, painful and dangerous, but necessary. The largest of the 3, a female marked by a distinctive white blaze across her chest, approached cautiously, nostrils flaring as she processed this strange new scent. "Where's your mother?" Elsa murmured, though the answer hung unspoken in the frozen air. Adult Vraken never abandoned their offspring unless death or disaster left them no alternative. The mother had likely fallen to the storm or been torn apart by a rival pack. Perhaps she was the very alpha female Elsa had been observing, separated from her cubs in the chaos of the sudden tempest. Elsa's decision crystallized in that heartbeat. She gathered all 3 cubs into her arms despite their feeble resistance, cradling them against her chest. They writhed and squirmed, their claws snagging on the fabric of her suit, but she maintained her grip, firm yet gentle, the way her grandmother had once taught her to handle frightened livestock on their Montana homestead. "I've got you," she whispered, tucking them inside her coat where her body heat could reach them. "I've got you." The journey back to the shelter was a nightmare. The cubs were heavier than she'd anticipated, their combined weight throwing off her balance as she fought against winds that seemed determined to hurl her into the abyss. Twice she stumbled, going down on one knee, barely catching herself before she could drop her precious cargo. The cubs whimpered against her chest, their small bodies radiating cold that seemed to seep through every layer of her clothing. Back within the stone shelter, Elsa evaluated her circumstances with the ruthless pragmatism that had made humanity the galaxy's most resilient species. Her distress beacon pulsed its signal into the storm, but extraction teams wouldn't arrive until the weather cleared. 12 hours minimum, possibly more. Her thermal suit would sustain her own life, but these cubs required more than mere survival. They needed genuine warmth, the kind that could only come from flame. The other civilized species scattered across the galactic community had long since discarded such archaic methods. The Zenthari employed plasma generation technology that could warm entire habitats with crystalline efficiency. The Kiksari possessed biological heat production capabilities, their bodies functioning as living furnaces. But humans still remembered how their primitive ancestors had endured ice ages armed with nothing but spark and kindling. Elsa's survival training had been comprehensive, mandated by the Galactic Council for all researchers working in extreme environments. But it was her childhood in Montana, learning from her grandmother Sarah, that truly prepared her for this moment. She could still hear the old woman's voice. Technology fails, Elsa. Batteries die, circuits freeze, machines break down. But fire is eternal. Learn to make it, and you'll never be helpless. The next hologram showed a Vrakan pack engaged in what could only be described as strategic planning, their formations and movements clearly coordinated before a hunt. Tactical communication and cooperation that requires theory of mind, the ability to understand what others know and planned accordingly. She continued through her evidence, building her case piece by piece. The chamber remained mostly silent, though she could see some representatives leaning forward with interest while others maintained expressions of skepticism. Then she reached the night of the storm. 6 months ago, I encountered 3 Vrakan cubs during a Category 5 blizzard. They were dying of hypothermia. The hologram shifted, showing thermal imaging of that night, the cubs' fading heat signatures, the shelter, the fire. I made a choice to save them using primitive fire-making techniques. What happened next provides the clearest evidence of Vrakan sentience. She showed the thermal recording of the adult male's arrival, his assessment of the situation, his deliberate choice to remain as a guardian rather than attack. This individual made a complex ethical decision. He recognized that I had preserved his offspring's lives. He understood reciprocity and chose cooperation over aggression, despite the fact that I was a member of an unknown species that had, from his perspective, captured his young. The chamber erupted in murmurs. Elsa pressed on, showing the recordings from the months that followed, the white-blazed female recognizing her in the field, the pack's behavioral changes that suggested they had communicated about the encounter, the way adult Vrakan in the region had begun to show tolerance for Elsa's presence, where before they had been hostile. The Vrakan possess all the markers we use to identify sentience, Elsa concluded. Self-awareness, complex communication, abstract reasoning, emotional reciprocity, and cultural transmission of knowledge. To deny their protected status would be to apply our standards inconsistently, and that inconsistency reveals something uncomfortable about our true motivations. She let that last statement hang in the air. It was a risk, directly challenging the Council's integrity, but it needed to be said. Marcus Chun rose smoothly to present the consortium's counterargument. His presentation was polished and professional, backed by impressive-looking data and expert testimony from Dr. Kess. They argued that Elsa's interpretations were anthropomorphic projections, that she had attributed human-like reasoning to what were merely sophisticated survival instincts. Dr. Nordstrom spent months in isolation on a frozen world, Chin said smoothly, his voice carrying easily through the chamber. Under such conditions, psychological projection is not only possible but likely. She saw intelligence because she needed to see it, because the alternative was accepting her own profound loneliness. It was a clever attack, questioning her mental state rather than directly refuting her evidence. Elsa felt anger flare in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. Dr. Kess took the platform next, his crystalline features reflecting the chamber's lights in dazzling patterns. The behavior Dr. Nordstrom describes can be explained through evolutionary psychology. The male Vrakan detected his offspring's scent and approached. He observed that they were alive and warm, and his protective instincts were satisfied. The human's presence was simply tolerated as a non-threat, nothing more. To claim this demonstrates sentience comparable to council species is to misunderstand the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. The arguments continued for hours. Expert testimony was presented from both sides. The consortium wheeled out economic projections showing the jobs that would be lost, the resources that would remain untapped, the setback to galactic development. They painted a picture of progress halted, of species denied prosperity, all because of one researcher's emotional attachment to dangerous predators. During a recess, Leon found Elsa in a private alcove overlooking the station's viewing gallery. Below them, Arcturus 7 rotated slowly, its ice-covered surface gleaming in the light of its star. "You're doing well," Leon assured her, though his expression suggested concern. "The council seems genuinely interested in your findings." "Interested isn't enough," Elsa said, pressing her palm against the viewport. "They need to be convinced. Chun is good, he's making me sound like I've gone native, lost my objectivity." "Have you?" Leon asked gently. Elsa turned to face him. "Maybe. But that doesn't make me wrong." "Leon," I looked into that Vracken's eyes, and I saw someone looking back. Not something. Someone. A father protecting his children. A being making moral choices. How can I ignore that? "You can't," Leon agreed. "That's what makes you a better scientist than Kess will ever be. You're willing to let the evidence challenge your assumptions." When the session reconvened, Council Representative Thrix announced that they would hear one final testimony before deliberation. "We have received a request from Dr. Sarah Chinokafor, chair of the Interspecies Ethics Committee. Dr. Chinokafor has studied the materials submitted by both parties and wishes to address the council." Elsa felt a flutter of hope. Dr. Chinokafor was legendary in the xenobiology community, a woman whose work on defining consciousness across species boundaries had literally written the standards the council now used. If anyone could cut through the political noise and focus on the science, it was her. The elderly doctor moved slowly to the platform, her age evident in every careful step. But when she spoke, her voice carried the strength of absolute conviction. "Honored representatives, I have spent 60 years studying the nature of consciousness across 100 different species. I have developed the very metrics we use to evaluate sentience. And I tell you now, with complete certainty, that the Vraken of Arcturus 7 meet and exceed those standards." She activated her own holographic display, showing comparisons between Vraken behavior and that of recognized sentient species. The parallels were undeniable. But the question before this council is not truly about consciousness metrics. It is about whether we have the courage to apply our own standards fairly when doing so is inconvenient. Dr. Chinokafor turned slowly, her gaze sweeping across the assembled representatives. "I was born on Earth, in a time when my ancestors were fighting for recognition of their full humanity. I have studied the historical records of that struggle, and I see disturbing parallels here. When recognition of consciousness becomes economically or politically inconvenient, we develop very sophisticated arguments for why it doesn't really count." The chamber had gone absolutely silent. The consortium argues that Vraken consciousness is merely instinctual, not truly aware. Our own ancestors once had similar things said about them. They argue that Dr. Nordstrom has been influenced by emotional connection, as if empathy somehow invalidates observation. But I would argue the opposite, that her willingness to form that connection allowed her to see what those of us observing from a safe distance might miss. She paused, letting her words sink in. If we deny protected status to the Vraken despite clear evidence of their sentience, we establish a precedent that consciousness can be dismissed when it interferes with profit. We tell every species in this council that their own protection is contingent not on what they are, but on whether recognizing what they are remains convenient. I ask you, is that the precedent we wish to set? Dr. Chinokafor concluded her testimony and returned to her seat. The silence that followed was profound. Council Representative Thrix called for deliberation. The representatives withdrew to their private chambers while Elsa, Leon, and the others waited in the gallery. The minutes stretched into hours. Elsa found herself replaying that night in the storm over and over, remembering the weight of the cubs in her arms, the intelligence in the male Vraken's eyes, the choice they had both made to protect rather than destroy. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the representatives returned. Thrix's expression was unreadable as he activated the central hologram. The Council has reached a decision. By a vote of 187 to 93, with 20 abstentions, we grant the Vraken of Arcturus 7 provisional protected status under the Galactic Accords. All exploitation claims in Vraken territory are hereby suspended pending completion of a comprehensive sentience study. Relief washed over Elsa like a physical wave. It wasn't a complete victory. Provisional status could be challenged, but it was enough. Enough to stop the immediate threat. Enough to give the Vraken time. Marcus Chin was already on his feet, lodging formal objections. The consortium representatives looked furious. But Dr. Chinokafor caught Elsa's eye across the chamber and nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement and approval. The journey back to Arcturus 7 took 3 days. Elsa spent most of it staring out the viewport at the stars, processing everything that had happened. Leon tried to get her to celebrate, but she couldn't quite manage it. Not yet. Not until she knew for certain that the Vraken were truly safe. When their shuttle finally touched down at the research station, Elsa wasted no time. She grabbed her field gear and headed immediately for the Northern Territories where she knew the pack with the white-blazed female would be hunting. She found them as the sun was setting, the pack moving through the ice fields with practiced coordination. And there, among the adults now fully grown and magnificent, was the white-blazed female. She had become a powerful hunter, her movements confident and sure. The pack detected Elsa's presence almost immediately. Several of them turned to regard her, their amber eyes assessing the threat. But the white-blazed female moved forward, positioning herself between Elsa and the others. She made that same complex vocalization, the one Elsa's software still couldn't fully translate. But the meaning seemed clear enough. This one is known. This one is safe. The other pack members relaxed their defensive postures. One of them, the male who had been the smallest cub with the oversized paws, actually approached Elsa's position, coming within 10 meters before stopping and simply looking at her, acknowledging her presence. Remembering. Elsa felt tears streaming down her face. "You made it," she whispered. "You all made it. And now you're going to be okay. The council recognized you. You're protected now." The white-blazed female tilted her head, then did something extraordinary. She lowered herself into a sitting position and waited, patient and attentive, as if she understood that Elsa needed this moment of connection. They stayed like that for perhaps 10 minutes, human and Vraken, separated by evolution and language, but connected by something deeper. A shared experience of a night when kindness had triumphed over fear, when two species had chosen cooperation over conflict. Finally, the white-blazed female rose and returned to her pack. They moved off into the gathering darkness, their forms gradually disappearing into the ice fields. Elsa watched until they were gone, then activated her communicator. "Leon, it's me. I'm back in the Northern Territories. Mark the time and location. I just had direct, peaceful contact with the pack." Females initiated the interaction. I think they remember. I think they understand what happened at the council." "Elsa, that's impossible." Leon's voice crackled back. "There's no way they could know about the council decision." "Maybe not the specifics," Elsa agreed, watching the stars begin to emerge in Arcturus 7's darkening sky. "But they know something changed. They know they're safer now. Call it instinct, call it awareness, call it whatever you want. They know." As she made her way back to the station, Elsa thought about Dr. Chinokafor's words in the council chamber, about the courage to apply standards fairly, about recognizing consciousness even when it was inconvenient. The fight wasn't over. Provisional status could still be challenged, and the consortium would certainly try. But for now, tonight, the Vraken of Arcturus 7 could hunt and raise their young without the threat of displacement hanging over them. And somewhere out in the ice fields, 3 cubs who had been saved by fire had grown into adults who would pass their own stories to the next generation. Stories about a night when a strange creature had given them warmth, about a father who had chosen trust over violence, about the night when 2 species learned that consciousness recognized consciousness, regardless of form. The fire that Elsa had built in that storm shelter had indeed grown. It burned now in council chambers and in the hearts of those who believed that all sentient life deserved protection. It burned in the memory of cubs who had become adults, carrying forward the knowledge that not all strangers were threats. And it would continue to burn, a light against the darkness, for as long as there were beings willing to kindle it. 1 year later, Elsa stood before a classroom of young xenobiology students at the Galactic Academy, the Council's premier educational institution orbiting the capital world of Prima Station. The request to teach had come as a surprise, but Director Kamal had insisted she accept. "Your story has resonated across the galaxy," he told her. "Students need to hear it directly from you. They need to understand that science isn't just about data, it's about having the courage to defend what the data tells us, even when it's difficult." Now, looking at the eager faces before her, human, Zenthari, Kixari, Delvarian, and a dozen other species, Elsa felt the weight of responsibility. These students would be the next generation of researchers, the ones who would encounter new species on distant worlds and have to make the same kinds of judgments she had made. "Before we begin," she said, "I want to show you something." She activated the holographic display, and the classroom filled with the scene from that night in the storm. The students watched in silence as the thermal imaging played out. The dying cubs, the fire, the arrival of the massive male Vraken, the long night of shared guardianship. When it ended, a young Kixari student raised her hand. "Dr. Nordstrom, weren't you afraid? That Vraken could have killed you easily." "Terrified," Elsa admitted. "But fear shouldn't prevent us from doing what's right. That's the lesson I want you to take from this, that sometimes the most important scientific discoveries happen when we're willing to be vulnerable, to connect rather than simply observe." A human student in the back spoke up. "My uncle works for the mining consortium. He says the Arcturus 7 decision cost thousands of jobs, that your emotional response endangered livelihoods across multiple systems." Elsa had expected this question. Your uncle isn't wrong about the economic impact. But ask yourself this. Would those jobs be worth having if they required us to commit genocide? Because that's what we would have done. The Vraken would have been displaced, contained, slowly eliminated. We've seen it happen on other worlds. At some point, we have to decide what kind of civilization we want to be. She paused, looking each student in the eye. The galaxy is vast, and we're going to encounter countless forms of consciousness we don't yet understand. Some will be similar to ours, some will be radically different. The question isn't whether we can exploit them, the question is whether we should. And the answer to that question defines who we are. A Zenthari student, her crystalline features catching the light, asked quietly, "Do you still go back to Arcturus 7? Elsa smiled. "Every chance I get. The comprehensive sentience study is ongoing, and I'm the lead researcher. Last month, the white-blazed female, we call her Aurora now, had her first litter. 3 cubs just like her mother had. When I approached the den site, she let me observe from a distance. She didn't see me as a threat. She saw me as, I think the word is friend." She pulled up a new hologram, this one showing Aurora with her cubs, teaching them to hunt on the ice fields. This is the future we saved. Not just a species, but generations of stories, of knowledge passed down, of families forming and thriving. That's what sentience means. It means the capacity for culture, for love, for hope. The class ended, but several students lingered, asking questions, seeking guidance for their own future research. Elsa answered each one patiently, remembering her own days as a student, full of idealism and uncertainty. That evening, alone in her quarters aboard the Academy station, Elsa received a message marked urgent. It was from Leon, still stationed on Arcturus 7. "Elsa, you need to see this," his message began, excitement clear in his voice. The attached video file showed Aurora's pack engaged in what could only be described as a teaching session. The adult Vraken were demonstrating something to the younger generation, and they were using fire. Elsa's breath caught. On the recording, several adolescent Vraken watched as an adult carefully arranged dried vegetation and struck stones together, creating sparks. It took several attempts, but eventually a small flame caught. The young ones approached cautiously, just as Aurora and her siblings had done in that shelter a year ago. They're teaching each other. Leon's voice continued on the recording. Cultural transmission of a learned behavior. Fire-making. Elsa, they learned it from watching you that night. And now they're passing it on. This is unprecedented. This is evolution, Elsa whispered, finishing his thought. This is evolution in real time. She sat back, overwhelmed by the implications. The Vraken weren't just sentient. They were adaptive, capable of incorporating new knowledge from outside their species. The fire that had saved 3 cubs had become part of Vraken culture itself, a gift exchanged between species, a symbol of the alliance forged in darkness and cold. Elsa began composing her response to Leon, her fingers flying across the datapad. There would be new papers to write, new evidence to present, further confirmation that the Council's decision had been correct. But more than that, there was the profound satisfaction of knowing that her choice that night, to save rather than abandon, to connect rather than isolate, had rippled outward in ways she could never have imagined. The fire continued to burn, carried now not just in human hands, but in the paws of the Vraken themselves. 2 species, learning from each other, growing together, proving that consciousness, wherever it emerged, sought the same things: warmth, safety, connection, and hope. Tomorrow she would share this new discovery with her students. She would show them that the story didn't end with one rescue or one council decision. The story was ongoing, still being written with every interaction between human and Vraken, every moment of mutual respect and understanding. And somewhere on Arcturus 7, beneath alien stars, Aurora watched over her cubs by firelight, a behavior that would have been impossible without that single night of trust between species. The light flickered and danced, holding back the darkness, a testament to what could be achieved when consciousness recognized consciousness, when fear gave way to compassion, and when 2 different kinds of intelligence chose cooperation over conflict. The fire burned on. 2 weeks after receiving Leon's message, Elsa returned to Arcturus 7 for what would become the most significant observation of her career. The research station had been expanded, now housing a full team of xenobiologists, anthropologists, and ethicists dedicated to documenting Vraken culture. But Elsa ventured out alone, as she always did, trekking across the familiar ice fields to the territory where Aurora's pack resided. The landscape had changed with the seasons. Great ice formations had shifted, creating new valleys and ridges that transformed the moon's surface into an ever-evolving sculpture garden. She found them at dusk, the pack gathered in a wide circle around not 1 fire, but 3. The Vraken had refined the technique, creating sustainable flames that burned longer and brighter than her improvised campfire had managed. They used the fires for warmth, yes, but also for something more profound, as gathering places where the pack came together, where the young learned from the old, where bonds were strengthened. Aurora spotted Elsa immediately and separated from the group, approaching with the confident gait of a pack leader. She had risen in status, her intelligence and adaptability marking her as exceptional even among her kind. When she reached Elsa, she did something that made the scientist's heart swell with emotion. Aurora sat down and deliberately placed 1 massive paw forward, extending it toward Elsa in what could only be interpreted as an invitation. A gesture of greeting, perhaps, or recognition. Whatever its exact meaning, the intent was clear: acknowledgement of their shared history, of the debt between them, of the bond that transcended species. Elsa slowly extended her own hand, letting it rest near Aurora's paw without quite touching. They remained like that for a long moment, 2 beings from different worlds connected by fire and memory and the simple choice to show kindness when it would have been easier to turn away. "Thank you," Elsa whispered, "for remembering, for teaching them, for showing the galaxy what your people are capable of." Aurora made that complex vocalization, the one that had started it all. This time, Elsa's translation software offered a new interpretation, refined by months of additional data. Friend, Firebringer, pack bond. Friend, Firebringer, pack bond. 3 words that summarized a revolution in interspecies relations, that captured the essence of what had transpired on this frozen moon. Elsa had brought fire, but she had received something far more valuable in return, proof that consciousness, compassion, and connection could bridge any divide. As the alien sun dipped below the horizon and the stars emerged in their crystalline brilliance, Elsa sat at a respectful distance from the pack, watching the fires burn and feeling the warmth of Aurora's presence nearby. This was why she had devoted her life to xenobiology, not for accolades or academic papers, but for moments like this, when the barriers between species dissolved and all that remained was the fundamental recognition that we are not alone in our awareness, our emotions, our capacity to change and grow. The Vraken had learned to make fire, and in doing so, they had proven beyond any doubt that they were not mere animals, but people, different from humans, yes, but no less deserving of respect, protection, and the right to determine their own future. The fire burned on, and with it, hope for a galaxy where all forms of consciousness could coexist, learn from one another, and build something greater together than either could achieve alone.